and being a little smaller, I have my little hat in hand, and I usually go to the studios to make my little movies. I don't have the type of cash base to try to keep that much control. Of course, I think you set up those relationships with those studios. That's why I work a lot with HBO. And my films, like Rocket Science, that's being directed by Jeff Blitz, who did Spellbound, the documentary last year. We just finished his film, and that's going to be going out through, Picture House, which was, I call it still a studio, but I guess they call it indie still. I don't know what the sort of definitions of indie and studio are, to me, are blurred anyway. My thing is, who has the check? Can you pay us? Thanks. And then my other films are usually going through something like that, or I'm doing one-off. So, and I try to find those relationships with executives at studios that have my vision, or have the filmmaker's vision, and they're able to, walk through with a delicate hand. And the fact that I usually do things for a price, usually they leave you alone. I think some of these guys do things for a lot of money, where I don't. I want to get like that someday, but not today.
I like hearing myself described as somebody who does things for a lot of money. I think it's, I definitely agree with everything that those guys in the other half of the table were saying, although I totally see where you're coming from too. I mean, what it comes down to for me is every project, kind of, the money has a personality. And if you have to try and fit the personality of the project to the money, and sometimes we do that successfully, and sometimes sometimes it's a little bit more of I'm never going to work with those horrible financiers again until they're the only people who want to finance my movie. Okay, you got that? I mean, so sometimes we've definitely had difficult relationships with financiers that we've gone back into, because at least sometimes those are beasts that we know. But I guess what I mean is also, like for Todd's films, for example, we often try and create pull the financing together in such a way that gives him as much control over the final product as possible, and as much control over casting and really over every single element, which often means pulling the financing together in a sort of House of Cardian fashion. One piece from foreign, one piece equity, one piece soft money, which can be a little hair-raising, but at the end of the day, it leaves us very free and clear.
Yeah, I'm trying to think what to add without getting a little bit more specific, especially from a filmmaker's perspective. I think each of my experiences of the films that I've written and then directed are slightly different in shades. But I think the only way anybody makes a lot of money and maintains control is after they've had a huge hit in Hollywood. I don't know if, you might be the closest candidate, Alexander. I don't know, but that's not something I experienced. But which would be amazing, because I think then you see these people who have access to studio options and maintaining creative control, and it's obviously best when it comes from a project that came out of your own hands and that a lot of people love and admire, like the last couple of films that you've made, which I feel the same way about. But it's hard. We started the film that we're going into production on with Christine was a film that I got paid to write for the first time really in my life, and it was unusual circumstances, because it came off the sort of our success with my last feature film, Far From Heaven, but it came with a particular value in that it's a film about the life of Bob Dylan, told from a sort of unique perspective, not a traditional biopic linear narrative. And to both Christine's and my surprise, we got the rights from Dylan. So we kind of came with a sort of undisclosed or an untappable value with those rights, obviously. Although the script hadn't been written yet, so there was interest in my next film after Far From Heaven. So we did sort of meet studio people and talk it through. So we sort of thought that we were going to be in a good position of control to get a little money for something with that value attached. And we were and we weren't. The process, which we can all get into more as we talk down the line, came with great interest, and then a lot of questions about the script, regardless of other values that we would end up bringing to the film, like cast. So it's always a tricky situation, and it always comes down to what kind of budget are you talking about, and what is the relationship to the budget you need to, cap the values you're bringing to the table.
Maybe follow that up, because it's one of the things I wanted to talk about was exactly that, the relationship of the budget to the creative needs of the project. I think there's a lot of times people will say, well, if you want total creativity, you have to do it really, really cheap. And then as we were talking backstage, Michael was saying, well, yeah, the opposite can be true. Sometimes you can't be creative unless you have more money to do the things that you want. So when a project first comes in, or when you're first conceptualizing a project, and maybe are either presented with or you've developed a budget number, how does that number, how do you factor that number into your quest for creativity, if that makes any sense? Or how do, I guess, what's your, on both the high end and the low end, how do you, what's your approach towards budgeting a project and finding financing for it that would secure some element of control? Maybe so, Ted.
The odd thing that I find often about a budget is it's not the question of going through the script and determining how much money you really need to do the film as the filmmaker wants it. It's kind of trying to thumbnail guess what the market value of this full project is. That really ends up setting up your budget. There's many films that, yeah, this is really a $10 million movie, but we know we're only going to get 6. That this is a film that we can make for $3 million, or in my experience, say, the film I know that we can make for 15, but we actually knew we could get 23. It's some of those questions, and really it's determined, I think, by how much work and how much work the director-producer team is willing to put into it in the beginning, and how much control you've maintained. That the example of Sideways and how Alexander and Michael could have Paul Giamatti and get a very good budget for that, 21 grams on my experience. Even something all across the board, Friends with Money, they're projects that by developing it in an independent way, packaging it, and the further work that could be done, say picking out the location that we wanted to shoot in, drawing the line in the sand and basically saying, here's the deal, we want to make this film for $12 million, and we want to shoot in 4 months, and we want really aggressive progress to production language in the deal, and in addition to that, we want final cut and a X, Y, Z. Then you're actually putting something in front of the buyers and reducing them to buyers so they can evaluate whether they want it or not. And that's the way to get often the most aggressive budget. The experiences I've had when we've developed a project within the studio system, the studios have to budget for risk management. That it has to be really safe in terms of the number of days. It has to have, you need the proper, you need single trailers for the top 5 actors. You need to have double trips. You need to have the massage therapist. Just all this other stuff that you can look at and say, well, we're going to cut it. Well, you knew you had that in your last budget.
What's a double trip?
I meant. Well, yes, I meant like double airfare.
Oh, I see. 2 first class.
Like more than just like getting them there.
Must be that song Underwear.